I don't talk much, but I can give you sons. That's what the Apache girl said to the lonely mountain man. He found her bleeding in his root cellar, escaped from government chains. She saw his empty cradle, his hollow grief, and offered him hope. But when cavalry horses thunder up the mountain and a corrupt judge declares their marriage illegal, their sacred bond becomes a crime. The railroad wants her land. The law wants her gone. Can two broken hearts stand against a system built to destroy them? Or will love become another casualty of greed and power? Before we begin, send a quick wave in the comments. Tell me your city, your country, your vibe. It's amazing how stories like this echo across the world. Jacob Thornfield's boots crunched on the narrow mountain path as he made his final approach to his cabin. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of pine and wood smoke, making him pause. He hadn't left a fire burning when he departed for his week-long hunting trip. His weathered hand instinctively moved to the Colt at his hip as his keen eyes surveyed the clearing. The cabin looked undisturbed at first glance. No broken windows. Door still locked, but something felt off to his tracker's instincts. Years of mountain living had taught him to trust those feelings. Unlocking the heavy wooden door, Jacob stepped inside, letting his eyes adjust to the dim interior. The familiar sense of his home reached him. Leather, dried herbs, wood. But there was something else. Something human. He set his pack down slowly, propping his rifle carefully against the wall. Everything appeared to be in its place, yet subtly wrong, like a reflection in troubled water. Moving with deliberate quietness, he began to take stock. The food stores in his cupboard had been disturbed, not ransacked, carefully used. He counted his preserved jars, noting several missing. His winter preparations had been methodically picked through, with only what was needed taken. This was no ordinary thief. His heart clenched when his gaze fell on Sarah's quilt. The precious handmade blanket, one of the few things he had left of his wife, was folded differently than he'd left it. He always draped it just so across the back of her rocking chair, but now it lay in neat squares, placed with careful respect on the seat instead. The herb rack above his cook stove drew his attention next. Alongside his usual stores of yarrow and elderberry hung fresh bundles of golden seal and echinacea, healing plants he hadn't gathered himself. They were tied with expert care, arranged to dry properly in the warm air above the stove. "Hello?" he called out, his voice rough from disuse. "Anyone here?" The cabin's silence felt charged, expectant. Jacob moved methodically through the small space, noting more signs of his uninvited guest. The floors had been swept. His few dishes were cleaned and stacked with precision. Even the hearth had been carefully maintained, with fresh ashes disposed of and new kindling laid ready. This wasn't the work of a desperate vagrant or opportunistic thief. Someone had been living here, treating his home with surprising respect. The thought made his chest tight. This cabin was his sanctuary, the place where he nursed his grief for Sarah and their infant son. Having someone else here felt like a violation of their memory, no matter how carefully they'd treated his belongings. As he completed his inspection, one space remained unchecked, the root cellar. The heavy trapdoor in the floor led to the cool storage space below, where he kept his winter provisions. As he approached, his trained ear caught the faintest whisper of sound, breathing barely audible but unmistakable. Jacob's hand settled on his revolver as he stood before the cellar door. 3 years of solitude had made him wary of human contact, had wrapped his heart in layers of protective isolation. But something about the careful way his uninvited guest had treated his home made him hesitate. The breathing below grew slightly faster, betraying the hidden person's awareness of his presence. Jacob stood motionless, his fingers resting on the cold metal of his Colt, as he prepared himself to confront whoever had breached his solitude. Jacob's calloused fingers wrapped around the iron ring of the cellar door. With practiced caution, he lifted it slowly, wincing at the familiar creak of the hinges. Pale lamplight spilled down into the darkness below, illuminating rough-hewn shelves stocked with his winter provisions. In the furthest corner, a figure huddled against the earthen wall. Dark eyes met his directly, unflinching despite the fear evident in her rigid posture. She was just a girl no more than 19, her black hair tangled and her deerskin dress torn and muddy. An Apache, Jacob realized, noting the traditional beadwork at her collar. "You are the one who lives here," she said in careful English, her voice hoarse but steady. She didn't phrase it as a question. Jacob nodded, his hand still resting on his revolver, though his instinct to draw it had faded. The girl's direct gaze reminded him of Sarah's. Clear-eyed and honest, even in dire circumstances. "I am Ayanna," she continued, shifting slightly. A sharp intake of breath betrayed her pain, and Jacob's eyes dropped to her leg. A crude bandage, fashioned from torn cloth, was wrapped around her calf. Dark stains had seeped through, and even in the dim light he could see the angry red streaks of infection climbing toward her knee. Without waiting for his response, she held up her wrists, showing the raw marks where iron shackles had bitten into her skin. Beside her lay the broken restraints and a worn kitchen knife, its blade notched from sawing through metal. "Government men," she explained, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. 3 days ago, taking all Apache families south 400 miles to reservation. Her hand dropped to her wounded leg. "I could not let them take me. My grandmother's medicine." She gestured to a small leather bundle secured at her waist. Jacob recognized the hollow look in her eyes, the same one that greeted him in the mirror each morning. Loss had carved similar wounds in both their hearts. "Let me help you up," he said gruffly, holstering his revolver and extending his hand. "That leg needs tending." Ayanna studied his offered hand for a long moment before accepting it. She moved with careful dignity despite her obvious pain, and Jacob found himself admiring her composure. He helped her navigate the steep cellar steps, supporting her weight when her injured leg threatened to buckle. In the cabin's better light, the infection looked worse. Jacob guided her to sit in his chair by the stove, noting how her sharp eyes took in every detail of his home. Her gaze lingered on Sarah's rocking chair, the empty cradle in the corner, and the 2 tin plates set on his small table, one collecting dust, unused for 3 years. With practiced movements, Jacob gathered his medical supplies, clean cloths, whiskey for disinfecting, and healing salve. His hands, usually rough from working leather and wood, turned surprisingly gentle as he cleaned her wound. The cut was deep, likely from the same knife she'd used to win her freedom. "You have healer's hands," Ayanna observed quietly, watching him work. The sun was setting outside, painting the cabin's interior in soft amber light. Jacob paused in his ministrations to pour water into a tin cup, adding a piece of hardtack from his stores. He offered both to Ayanna, who accepted them with quiet dignity. They regarded each other across the small space, the lonely mountain man and the fugitive healer, their wariness softened, but not gone. In the growing darkness, they were 2 wounded souls sharing the same shelter, neither quite ready to trust but no longer afraid. Morning light crept through the cabin windows, painting golden stripes across the rough-hewn floorboards. Jacob stirred on his bedroll near the stove, where he'd insisted on sleeping to give Ayanna his narrow cot. The unfamiliar sounds of someone moving in his kitchen brought him fully awake. He opened his eyes to find Ayanna standing at his small table, carefully laying out 2 tin plates. Despite her injured leg, she'd managed to prepare a simple meal from his stores: cornmeal mush sweetened with the last of his molasses, and coffee that filled the cabin with its rich aroma. She'd tied back her long black hair with a leather strip, and her face showed less pain than the night before. "You should be resting that leg," Jacob said gruffly, pushing himself up. Ayanna merely nodded toward the waiting plate. "Eat," she said simply. They sat across from each other, the silence broken only by the scrape of spoons against tin. Jacob couldn't help but notice how her dark eyes moved methodically around his cabin, taking in every detail. She studied the faded curtains Sarah had sewn, the stack of mended shirts, the way everything was arranged for one solitary life. The morning light caught Sarah's photograph on the mantel, making the silver frame gleam. Ayana's gaze lingered there, then moved to the empty cradle in the corner, and finally to the extra place setting that had gathered dust for 3 years. "I don't talk much," she said suddenly, her voice clear in the quiet cabin, "but I can give you sons." Jacob's coffee cup froze halfway to his mouth. He stared at her, certain he'd misheard. "You give me safe place," she continued, meeting his startled gaze directly. "We both alone. We both know loss." Her words hung in the air between them. Jacob's hand trembled slightly as he set down his cup, coffee sloshing over the rim. Ayana gestured to the cradle, then to Sarah's photograph. "You had woman, child, both gone. I see in your eyes, same as mine." Her voice carried no pity, only recognition. "My family dead too. Soldiers, sickness, whiskey." She straightened her shoulders. "But I am strong, can work, can heal, can give you sons to fill empty places." Jacob's chest tightened as if gripped by an iron band. He pushed back from the table, needing space to breathe. Through the window, morning light filtered through the golden leaves of aspen trees, making them shimmer like coins in the breeze. Sarah's face filled his mind, her gentle smile, the way she'd sung to their infant son, her final fevered moments when he couldn't save either of them. The memory was a physical ache in his heart, yet underneath that familiar pain, Ayana's practical words stirred something he'd thought long buried. The possibility of a different future, of a home filled with more than just echoes. He stood at the window, aware of Ayana waiting patiently behind him. The aspen leaves trembled in the morning light, and Jacob felt himself trembling too, caught between grief for what he'd lost and this unexpected chance at what might be. Jacob cleared his throat, pushing back from the table. "You can stay until that leg heals proper. Nothing more than that." His voice was firm, but not unkind. Ayana nodded once, accepting his terms without argument. She gathered their breakfast dishes, moving carefully to protect her injured leg. Over the next several days, autumn's chill crept deeper into the mountain valley. Despite her wound, Ayana proved herself far more than a burden. While sorting through Jacob's dried herbs one morning, she pointed to several plants he'd dismissed as weeds. "These good medicine," she explained, separating them into neat piles. "These good eating." On the third day, she studied the clouds gathering over the peaks. Storm coming, 2 days. She gestured to the wispy mare's tails stretching across the blue sky. Jacob might have doubted, but sure enough, 48 hours later, the first snowflakes began to fall. When Jacob brought home a deer, Ayana showed him how her people preserved meat. She mixed juniper berries and wild sage with the salt, creating strips of venison that lasted longer and tasted better than any he'd prepared before. Her methods used less precious salt, too. Their days fell into a rhythm of shared work. Jacob found himself watching her sure movements as she cleaned his cabin or tended the herbs drying from the rafters. She had a grace to her, even with the limp, and her presence filled the empty corners of his home with a warmth he'd almost forgotten. One crisp morning, Jacob climbed the steep bank above Miller's Creek to check his beaver traps. The rocks were slick with frost, and his boots slipped. He caught himself before falling, but the sudden movement wrenched his shoulder badly. The pain made him curse through clenched teeth as he made his way back to the cabin. Ayana took one look at him and went straight to work. She crushed willow bark and wild mint, mixing them with hot water into a poultice. The medicine's sharp, clean scent filled the cabin as she pressed it against his shoulder. Within an hour, the throbbing had eased more than it ever had with his whiskey remedies. They developed their own way of talking, built on simple English words, gentle hand gestures, and the understanding that grows between people who work side by side. Ayana showed him how to weave stronger snares using the tough fibers she stripped from certain plants. The traps she helped him make caught twice as many rabbits as his old ones. For his part, Jacob taught her to handle his spare rifle. She was a quick study, learning to load, clean, and fire the weapon with careful precision. Her first shot hit the center of the target he'd painted on a dead pine, making him nod in approval. Neither of them spoke of her startling marriage proposal, but Jacob couldn't help noticing how the cabin had come alive again. The rooms felt warmer somehow, filled with the quiet sounds of another person's presence, the soft pad of moccasined feet, the whisper of fabric as she worked, the gentle clatter of 2 plates instead of 1 at mealtimes. One evening, they sat before the fire together. Jacob worked on whittling a new handle for his hunting knife, while Ayanna mended a tear in one of his shirts. The flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, and the domestic peace of the moment caught at something in Jacob's chest. He glanced up from his carving to find Ayanna's dark eyes meeting his. For a heartbeat, they held each other's gaze, both acutely aware of the simple intimacy they'd built, before turning back to their tasks in comfortable silence. The mountain air held the crisp bite of late autumn as Jacob made his way back from checking his trap lines. 2 weeks of sharing his cabin with Ayanna had settled into an unexpected comfort, though he still pushed away thoughts of her proposal. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the pines when he spotted her standing rigid on the cabin's porch, one hand shading her eyes as she stared intently toward the valley mouth. When she saw him, Ayanna's hand dropped in a sharp, urgent gesture. "Horses," she whispered as he drew near. "Many horses, moving together." Jacob cocked his head, listening. The rhythmic thud of hooves reached him before he saw the dust cloud rising above the tree line. His heart sank. He knew that sound. Not a random group of travelers or even bandits. This was the disciplined movement of a cavalry patrol. "Quick now," he murmured, taking Ayanna's arm. They hurried inside where he pulled up the loose floorboards, concealing the root cellar entrance. "Down you go. Stay quiet as a mouse, no matter what." Ayanna slipped into the darkness below without a word, her face composed, but her eyes dark with fear. Jacob scattered supplies around the entrance, making it look like simple storage space, then replaced the boards. He had barely straightened up when he heard the first horse snort outside. 8 soldiers rode into his yard, their blue uniforms dusty from the trail. At their head was a tall officer Jacob pegged as being in his late 30s. The captain's bearing was military precise, but something in his expression suggested internal conflict. "Afternoon," Jacob called out, stepping onto his porch. "I'm Jacob Thornfield. This here's my trading post." The officer dismounted smoothly. "Captain William Brooks, United States Cavalry." His tone was professional, but not harsh. "We're following reports of escaped Apache natives in this area. Have you seen any sign of them?" Jacob gestured to his coffee pot. "Happy to discuss it over coffee, Captain. Trail must be dusty." Brooks nodded his thanks, instructing his men to water their horses. Inside the cabin, Jacob busied himself with the coffee while the captain's keen eyes took in every detail. "Quite a few tracks around your cabin," Brooks observed carefully. "That'd be me," Jacob replied, keeping his voice casual. "I do a fair bit of hunting and trapping. Coffee's ready if you'd like some." Brooks accepted the tin cup, his gaze lingering on Sarah's photograph, the feminine touches around the cabin. "You have family here, Mr. Thornfield?" "Had," Jacob said shortly. "Lost them 3 years back. Fever." Something softened in the captain's eyes. "I'm sorry to hear that." He paused, then added quietly, "I need to search the premises. Protocol." Jacob nodded, forcing himself to stay relaxed as Brooks moved methodically through the cabin. The officer was thorough but respectful, careful not to disturb Sarah's things. Jacob's hands wanted to shake every time boots crossed the floorboards above where Ayanna hid, but he kept them steady around his coffee cup. As the search concluded and his men prepared to mount up, Brooks held back a moment. His voice dropped low. "Between us, Thornfield, I hope we don't find what we're looking for. These aren't warriors we're chasing, just women and children, fleeing conditions no human should endure." He straightened, adjusting his uniform. "Thank you for the coffee." Jacob watched them ride away, dust rising golden in the setting sun. Only when they had disappeared around the valley bend did he let out the breath he'd been holding. His hands trembled as he pulled up the floorboards. Ayanna emerged from the darkness, her face composed, but her shoulders tight with tension. They stood in silence as the last hoofbeats faded, both acutely aware of how close they'd come to discovery and how much they now had to lose. Dawn broke cold and clear over the mountain peaks. Jacob stood on his porch, watching the sunrise paint the aspens gold when he heard a single horse approaching. His hand moved to his revolver until he recognized Captain Brooks riding alone through the morning mist. The officer's face showed the strain of a sleepless night. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his usual military bearing seemed weighted with invisible burden. He dismounted slowly, as if his thoughts were elsewhere. "Didn't expect to see you back so soon, Captain," Jacob said carefully, noting the absence of other soldiers. Brooks removed his hat, running a hand through his graying hair. "Sent the patrol ahead. Need to speak with you, Mr. Thornfield. Man to man, if you're willing." Jacob studied him for a moment, then nodded toward the cabin. "Coffee's hot." Inside, they sat at Jacob's rough-hewn table, steam rising from tin cups between them. Brooks stared into his coffee as if searching for words. "What I'm about to tell you could end my military career," he finally said. "But I can't keep silent anymore. This Apache relocation, it's not what we're telling people, not about peace or progress or civilization." His jaw tightened. "It's about gold and silver." Jacob kept his expression neutral, but his hands tightened around his cup. "Railroad companies have been pressing the government," Brooks continued. "Their surveyors found mineral deposits throughout these mountains. Traditional Apache lands just happen to sit on top of potential mines." He looked up, meeting Jacob's eyes. "They're paying good money to make sure those lands get cleared, using the United States Army to do their dirty work." "Ain't the first time money's moved mountains," Jacob said quietly. "No." Brooks's voice was bitter. "But it should be the last. I joined the Army to serve with honor, to protect people. Instead, I'm forcing families from their homes so wealthy men can get wealthier." He shook his head. "My own grandfather was a circuit-riding preacher. He taught me that God's justice doesn't bow to man's greed. What we're doing here, it's not justice." Jacob watched the captain carefully. Dangerous thoughts for a military man. More dangerous not to think them. Brooks straightened in his chair. "Other patrols will be through here. They won't be as selective in their searching as I was. They'll have orders to be thorough." His eyes flickered meaningfully toward the floor where the root cellar lay hidden. "And they'll follow those orders." The warning hung clear in the air between them. Jacob nodded slowly, understanding all that wasn't being said. Brooks finished his coffee and stood. "One more thing you should know. Federal law provides certain protections for married Native women. Protections that override territorial regulations, even in cases of mixed marriages." He put on his hat, adjusting it carefully. "Just a point of law you might find interesting." Jacob walked him to the door, mind working over the captain's words. At his horse, Brooks turned back. "I don't know what choices you'll make, Mr. Thornfield, but whatever they are, make them soon. Time's growing short." From his porch, Jacob watched the captain ride away through the morning mist. The man was risking everything, his career, his reputation, perhaps his freedom, by turning a blind eye and offering what help he could. The weight of Brooks's warning settled heavy on Jacob's shoulders, along with the understanding that harder decisions lay ahead for all of them. The days following Captain Brooks's warning brought an unexpected peace to the cabin. With the immediate threat of discovery past, Jacob found the rigid walls he'd built around his heart beginning to crack. One evening, as Ayanna crushed herbs with a stone mortar, she began speaking softly about her grandmother. "She was great medicine woman of our people," she said, her English growing smoother with practice. "She knew songs for every healing, songs for broken bones, songs for fever dreams, songs to ease birthing pains." Jacob watched her practiced movements, noting how her hands moved with the same sureness her grandmother's must have shown. "She taught you all of them?" "Many songs, yes. But more than songs, she taught me to read the plants, to know which brings sleep, which fights poison." Ayana's dark eyes grew distant. "When soldiers came, she gave me her medicine bundle, told me to run. Said knowledge must live, even if people die." The quiet grief in her voice stirred something in Jacob. Before he realized it, he was talking about Sarah. "My wife, she loved wildflowers," he said, surprising himself. "Planted them all around our first cabin down in the valley. Said a home needed growing things to truly be alive." Ayana's hand stilled on the mortar. She didn't offer empty words of comfort, just listened with quiet understanding as Jacob continued. "She had this laugh, like spring water over stones, clear and bright." His voice roughened. "Used to wake me every morning before dawn, humming while she made breakfast. Haven't talked about that since the fever took her and our boy." "Loss lives in the heart like winter," Ayana said softly. "But winter is not forever." The first snow began falling outside, fat flakes drifting past the window. Ayana set aside her herbs and moved closer to the fire. "In my people's way, we have songs for winter too. Songs to remember that warm days return." She began a low, melodic chant, the unfamiliar syllables rising and falling like wind through pine branches. After singing it through twice, she looked at Jacob expectantly. "Now you try." His first attempt at the Apache words was clumsy, drawing a genuine smile from Ayana. The first he'd seen light up her face. The sight of it caught his breath. She corrected his pronunciation patiently, and they spent the evening practicing until he could stumble through the whole song. As they banked the fire for the night, Jacob found himself watching her movements around the cabin, the way she anticipated his needs, setting out his pipe and tobacco without being asked. How she remembered he preferred his coffee strong in the morning but weaker at night. The gentle touch of her hands when she changed the dressing on a cut he'd gotten while skinning a deer. These weren't just the actions of someone seeking shelter or safety. There was care in everything she did, attention born of genuine affection. Her original proposal hadn't been purely practical after all. Later, lying in his bed across the room from her bedroll, Jacob listened to her quiet breathing in the darkness. Snow whispered against the cabin walls, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf called to its mate. He thought about how empty this place had been before she arrived, how the very air had seemed dead with grief. Now there was warmth again, music, the scent of healing herbs, small comforts he hadn't realized he was missing until she brought them back into his life. With startling clarity, Jacob realized he was beginning to love this brave, direct woman. She had appeared in his life like an answer to prayers he'd been too afraid to voice, bringing light back into his darkness, one small kindness at a time. The mountain air held the crisp bite of approaching winter as Jacob swung his axe, splitting logs for the woodpile. The steady rhythm of steel against wood echoed through the clearing, matching the beating of his heart. A week had passed since that snowy evening of shared songs, and each day brought him and Ayana closer together in small, meaningful ways. The sound of hoofbeats made Jacob pause mid-swing. A familiar voice called out in Spanish-accented English, "God's peace be with you, friend." Father Miguel Santos appeared around the bend in the mountain path, his weathered face creased in a warm smile. The 55-year-old priest sat astride his bay mare, leading a pack mule loaded with supplies. His black cassock was dusty from the trail, and his silver cross caught the morning light. "Father Miguel," Jacob called back, setting down his axe. "Didn't expect to see you before the first snow." The priest dismounted with the ease of a man who spent more time in the saddle than at an altar. "The Lord's work cannot wait for fair weather, my friend." His keen eyes took in the cabin's appearance, fresh herbs drying by the door, a mended quilt airing on the line, small touches that spoke of a woman's presence. Before Jacob could explain, movement caught their attention. Ayanna emerged cautiously from behind the woodpile, her dark eyes assessing the newcomer. Father Miguel's eyebrows rose in surprise, but his expression remained gentle and free of judgment. "Greetings, young one," he said in Apache, his accent perfect. Ayanna's face brightened with recognition. She responded in the same language, her words flowing quickly. Jacob watched their exchange, understanding nothing but seeing the tension leave Ayanna's shoulders as she and the priest spoke. Father Miguel turned to Jacob. "We should talk inside," he said quietly. "I bring news you both need to hear." Over coffee and the stew Ayanna had prepared, Father Miguel revealed his true purpose in the territory. "I operate what you might call an underground railroad," he explained, warming his hands around his tin cup. "A network of good people, settlers, traders, even some military men with conscience, helping native families escape forced relocation." Jacob leaned forward. "Like Captain Brooks?" "Yes, William Brooks is one of our allies, but there are others in the cavalry not so understanding." The priest's face grew serious. "The patrols are increasing. Railroad companies have found gold in these mountains. They're pressing the military to clear all native people from the territory, by any means necessary." Ayanna listened intently, her hand unconsciously seeking Jacob's across the table. The gesture didn't escape Father Miguel's notice, nor did he miss how naturally they moved together as Ayanna rose to tend the fire while Jacob refilled their cups. "I see God's hand at work here," the priest said softly, watching Jacob's face. The months of grief-hardened lines had softened, replaced by something approaching peace. "You two have found healing in each other." "We have," Jacob admitted, his voice rough with emotion. Father Miguel set down his cup. "Then perhaps I can offer a solution. Under federal law, native women who are legally married to settlers have certain protections. No one can force them onto reservations or separate them from their husbands." The word marriage hung in the air between them. Jacob looked at Ayanna, seeing in her eyes the same mix of hope and uncertainty he felt in his own heart. What had begun as a practical arrangement had grown into something deeper. But were they ready for such a commitment? Father Miguel watched them both, his weathered hands folded patiently on the table. "I can perform the ceremony before I leave tomorrow," he said gently, "but only if you both are certain. Marriage before God is not a thing to be entered into lightly, even in desperate times." The cabin grew quiet, except for the crackling of the fire. Jacob and Ayanna faced each other across the table, each weighing the depth of their feelings against the urgency of their situation. The choice before them would change their lives forever, if they were brave enough to make it. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cabin's porch as Father Miguel returned from his morning prayers. He gestured toward the trail where a young girl led a spotted pony toward the cabin. "I'd like you both to meet someone special," he said warmly. "This is my niece, Elena Santos." Elena dismounted with graceful ease, her dark braids swinging. At 16 years old, she carried herself with the confidence of someone much older. Her Mexican and Apache heritage showed in her features, creating a striking blend of both cultures. "Uncle Miguel has told me so much about this trading post," Elena said in perfect English, smiling at Jacob. Then, turning to Ayanna, she switched effortlessly to Apache, her words flowing musical and clear. Ayanna's eyes lit up at hearing her native tongue. The two young women began talking rapidly, their hands moving in expressive gestures. Jacob watched in amazement as Ayanna's usual reserve melted away, replaced by animated conversation. "Elena travels with me as my interpreter," Father Miguel explained quietly to Jacob. "She speaks 3 languages fluently: English, Spanish, and Apache. Her father is my brother, and her mother was a wonderful Apache woman who taught Elena the old ways before passing." Inside the cabin, Elena helped Ayanna prepare the morning meal, their conversation flowing easily between languages. Through Elena's translations, Jacob learned more about the woman who had entered his life so unexpectedly. The medicine bundle Ayanna carries belonged to her grandmother, Elena explained, watching Ayana handle the carefully wrapped package with reverence. It contains sacred healing knowledge passed down through generations. She is the last one who knows certain traditions, special songs for healing, ways of preparing medicines that could be lost forever. Jacob's eyes followed Ayana's movements with new understanding as she measured herbs into the cooking pot. She wasn't just a refugee seeking shelter, she was a keeper of her people's wisdom. Later, the young women worked together in Jacob's small vegetable garden, pulling late-season weeds and gathering the last of the summer squash. Their laughter drifted through the mountain air, a sound that made both Jacob and Father Miguel smile. "I haven't heard such joy in this place since Sarah," Jacob admitted softly. Elena's presence seemed to unlock something in Ayana. Through the young interpreter, she began sharing stories of her life before the soldiers came. She spoke of learning at her grandmother's side, of gathering healing plants by moonlight, of ceremonies that connected her people to the land and each other. "The reservations are terrible places," Elena told them as they sat around the evening fire. Her young face grew serious. "I've seen many relocations in my travels with Uncle Miguel. The food is poor, the shelter's inadequate. Disease spreads quickly among the crowded people, especially in winter. The young and old suffer most." Father Miguel nodded gravely. "This is why our work is so important. We help where we can, though it never feels like enough." As the evening deepened, Elena encouraged Ayana to share one of her grandmother's healing songs. Ayana's voice rose clear and strong in the firelit cabin, the ancient words carrying power even though Jacob couldn't understand them. Elena translated softly, explaining how the song was meant to strengthen the spirit while the body healed. Jacob watched Ayana's face as she sang, seeing the depth of knowledge and tradition she carried. This wasn't just a marriage of convenience they were considering. She would bring the wisdom of generations to their union, preserving something precious that might otherwise be lost forever. The fire crackled softly as Ayana finished her song. Elena wiped tears from her eyes, then smiled at her new friend. "You must share more of your grandmother's stories," she said. "These teachings should not be lost." The mountain air grew crisp as autumn deepened around Jacob's cabin. Inside, the warmth of the hearth couldn't quite ease the tension as Jacob and Ayana struggled with Father Miguel's offer of marriage. They moved through their daily tasks together, stealing glances when they thought the other wasn't looking, each wrestling with doubts that seemed to grow larger in the silence. Jacob sat on the porch one afternoon, running his fingers over Sarah's worn silver wedding band that he kept in his pocket. Elena found him there, her young face full of understanding beyond her 16 years. "You're not betraying her," Elena said softly, settling beside him on the rough-hewn steps. "Sarah would want you to find happiness again." Jacob's voice was rough with emotion. "How can I be sure this isn't just desperation? Ayana needs protection, and I'm lonely. But marriage should be more than that." "Watch how she looks at you when you're gentle with injured animals," Elena suggested. "Or how you smile when she sings while working. That's not desperation. That's something growing true and strong." Inside the cabin, Ayana sorted healing herbs with trembling fingers. She confided in Elena later that day, while they gathered late autumn berries. "I ask too much," she whispered in Apache. "His heart still bleeds for his lost family." Elena took her hand. "Your presence doesn't erase his past. It helps him heal. I see how carefully you tend his home, how you respect Sarah's memory while building something new." Father Miguel spoke privately with Jacob that evening, his weathered face serious in the lamplight. "Marriage must be genuine to withstand legal challenges," he explained, "but it offers real protection. Federal law increasingly recognizes mixed marriages, despite what territorial authorities might wish." The priest leaned forward, his voice low. "You're not alone in this. There are other couples like you throughout the territory, good people building bridges between cultures, finding love across boundaries others call uncrossable." As the second day drew to a close, Jacob found Ayanna sitting alone under the stars. Without Elena's translation, they had fewer words to share, but something deeper had grown between them. He settled beside her on the fallen log, their shoulders barely touching. "I afraid too," Ayanna said softly in her careful English. "But when I look at stars, I feel—" She touched her heart, searching for the word. "Hope." Jacob reached for her hand in the darkness. Her fingers were strong and calloused from work, but they fitted perfectly between his own. "I never expected to find hope again," he admitted. "Then you arrived and brought light back into my world?" Ayanna turned to study his face in the starlight. "I see your gentle heart," she said. "How you care for hurt animals, how you still set place for Sarah, good man, strong man." She squeezed his hand. "Man, I learning to love." A shooting star streaked across the sky, leaving a trail of silver light. Another followed, then another, as if the heavens themselves were celebrating their decision. Jacob and Ayanna sat together in the growing cold, their joined hands warm between them, watching nature's display. This was more than a marriage of convenience or desperate circumstances. As the stars fell around them, both felt the hand of Providence at work, bringing together two wounded souls to create something new and beautiful from their shared loss. They didn't need Elena's translation to understand the peace that settled between them. Tomorrow would bring ceremony and change, but tonight was for quiet acceptance of the path ahead. Their hearts, so carefully guarded for so long, opened fully to the possibility of love renewed and family restored. The aspen grove glowed like hammered gold in the first light of dawn. Father Miguel stood beneath the trembling leaves, his weathered prayer book open in his hands. The morning air carried the sharp scent of sage and late wildflowers, woven carefully into Ayanna's long dark hair by Elena's skilled fingers. Jacob waited by the priest, tugging at the collar of his best shirt. Ayanna had spent hours the previous evening cleaning and mending it, her careful stitches barely visible in the fabric. His hands shook slightly as he touched his mother's gold ring in his pocket, a simple band that had traveled west with him so many years ago. When Ayanna emerged from between the trees, Jacob's breath caught in his throat. She wore a dress Elena had helped her alter from Sarah's trunk, modified with Apache beadwork and symbols of healing. Her steps were sure and graceful as she approached, carrying her grandmother's medicine bundle close to her heart. Father Miguel began the ceremony in his rich voice, speaking first in English, then Spanish, while Elena softly translated into Apache. "Marriage is a sacred covenant," he declared, "one that bridges worlds and honors both heaven and earth. Today we witness not just the joining of two hearts, but the weaving together of traditions that make our territory richer." Golden leaves drifted around them like nature's own blessing as they exchanged their vows. Ayanna spoke first in careful English, her voice clear and strong. "I promise to honor your memories while we build new ones together, to keep your home warm with love and fill it with children's laughter again." Then in Apache, she pledged to share her people's wisdom and healing ways. Jacob's voice roughened with emotion as he made his own promises. "I vow to protect you and the sacred knowledge you carry, to stand between you and any who would harm you, and to learn the ways of your people with an open heart." Elena translated his words into Apache, tears of joy shining in her young eyes. When the time came for rings and tokens, Jacob's hands steadied as he slipped his mother's gold band onto Ayanna's finger. The morning sun caught the simple circle of metal, making it glow like a fallen star. Ayanna presented him with a small leather medicine pouch, its surface decorated with carefully sewn symbols of protection and unity. She hung it around his neck with gentle hands, explaining through Elena that it contained herbs to guard his spirit and strengthen his heart. After the final prayers and blessings, Elena brought out baskets of food for the celebration. The small wedding feast included fresh venison prepared in both frontier and Apache styles, wild greens Ayanna had gathered, and Elena's crusty bread still warm from the morning's baking. They ate together like family, sharing stories and laughter that echoed off the mountain walls. Father Miguel brought out his guitar as the sun climbed higher, its gentle notes mixing with the whisper of aspen leaves. Elena's clear voice rose in song, first in English, then Spanish, finally Apache, while Jacob led Ayana in a simple dance. Her dark eyes shone with happiness as they moved together, no longer two lonely souls, but a family united. The mountain valley filled with music and joy, carrying their celebration to the bright autumn sky. For the first time since losing Sarah, Jacob felt truly complete, his heart healed by this unexpected love. Ayana's face glowed with contentment, finally having found not just safety, but genuine acceptance and affection in her new home. They danced until the shadows lengthened beneath the aspens, their feet crushing fallen leaves that released the sweet scent of autumn. The golden light, the music, and the love surrounding them transformed the simple mountain grove into sacred space, blessing the beginning of their life together. The autumn days settled into an easy rhythm at the mountain trading post. Ayana moved through the cabin like a gentle breeze, transforming Jacob's bachelor chaos into orderly efficiency. Her Apache wisdom showed in every detail, herbs hung in careful bundles from the rafters, supplies arranged by season and purpose, each item in its proper place. Jacob watched in amazement as his wife's quiet presence filled the cabin with new life. His rough hands, more accustomed to trapping and hunting, now shaped wood into shelves and cabinets for her medicines. He built her a proper workspace near the kitchen window where morning light could illuminate her healing work. The sound of his hammer and saw mixed with her soft humming as she sorted roots and berries. Their nights together grew tender and warm as friendship deepened into physical love. Jacob marveled at how natural it felt to hold her close, to share gentle touches and soft words in the firelight. Ayana's reserved manner melted away behind closed doors, revealing a playful side that made his heart light. The first test of their new life came when 3 trappers arrived, one nursing a badly infected leg wound. Instead of the usual gruff trading, Ayana stepped forward with quiet authority. Her skilled hands cleaned and dressed the wound while preparing a poultice of herbs that drew out the infection. The trapper's pain-creased face relaxed as her medicine took effect. "Much obliged, ma'am," he said, tipping his hat with newfound respect. His companions watched wide-eyed as she also treated their persistent winter coughs with a special tea. Word spread quickly through the mountain paths about the Apache woman who can heal anything. Soon more traders appeared, some seeking supplies, but others hoping for Ayana's healing touch. Jacob's trading post grew busier than ever before. He noticed how even the most prejudiced men softened their attitudes after experiencing his wife's gentle care. One crisp morning, as Jacob returned from checking his trap lines, he found Ayana waiting with glowing eyes. She took his rough hands in hers and placed them on her belly. "New life grows here," she said simply. "Your son or daughter?" Jacob's knees went weak as joy and terror warred in his heart. Memories of Sarah's difficult pregnancy and tragic death threatened to overwhelm him, but Ayana's steady gaze anchored him to the present. "I am strong," she assured him, reading his fears. "My grandmother taught me much about bringing babies into the world. This child will thrive." Her quiet confidence steadied his racing thoughts. That evening, they sat together planning the future, his arm curved protectively around her shoulders. They would need to expand the cabin before winter's end, perhaps add a proper bedroom and storage space. Ayana suggested a larger garden come spring to grow both food and medicine. "The trading post does well now," Jacob said, working out the details. "We can afford proper lumber from the sawmill down valley." Ayana nodded, leaning into his embrace. "I will teach our child both ways, your people's and mine. They will be stronger for knowing both." As darkness settled outside their snug cabin, they sat before the crackling fire, content in their shared silence. Ayana's head rested naturally against Jacob's shoulder, while his hand spread warm and protective over her still flat belly. The practical marriage arrangement they'd begun with had blossomed into something neither had dared hope for. A love that filled every empty space in their hearts with light. Jacob marveled at how quickly his lonely cabin had become a true home again. His wife's presence had transformed not just the physical space, but his whole world. As the fire cast dancing shadows on the walls, he offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the unexpected gift of this new family. The sun rose with a chill, casting a pale light over the mountain valley. Jacob Thornfield was already awake, tending to the fire while Ayanna prepared breakfast. The air smelled of fresh coffee and sizzling venison, filling their small cabin with warmth. It was a peaceful morning, but an unshakable sense of unease hung in the air, like the stillness before a storm. As they sat down to eat, Jacob noticed Ayanna's brow furrowed with worry. "What troubles you, my heart?" he asked gently. "It is the world outside our door," she replied quietly. "I feel change coming. It stirs like wind before rain." Jacob nodded, sharing her concern but hoping for the best. They had found happiness together, a fragile happiness built on love and shared dreams for their future. But deep down, he could not shake the fear that lingered in his heart. Their peaceful breakfast was interrupted by a loud knock at the door. Startled, Ayanna looked up while Jacob set down his cup. He exchanged a glance with her, sensing her anxiety rise. "Stay here," he said firmly, standing up to approach the door. When he opened it, his heart sank. There stood Judge Harrison Blackwood, a man of imposing stature and cold demeanor, flanked by Federal Marshal Thomas Hayes. Blackwood wore an expression of practiced efficiency as he scanned the cabin before stepping inside without invitation. "Good morning, Thornfield," Blackwood began without preamble. "I have come on official business regarding your marriage to this Apache woman." Jacob's stomach twisted at the word official. He had heard rumors about Judge Blackwood and his ties to railroad interests that sought to claim lands once held sacred by Native people. "What do you mean?" Jacob asked sharply. "I mean," Blackwood said coolly as he produced a stack of documents from his coat pocket, "that your marriage is now deemed invalid under new territorial law." He handed Jacob one of the papers. Jacob's hands shook as he read through it. Convoluted legal jargon declaring that all marriages between white settlers and Native women were void unless sanctioned by specific territorial authorities who would never grant such recognition. "This cannot be right," Jacob protested vehemently. "Our marriage was performed by Father Miguel Santos, a recognized priest. We followed all customs and traditions." Blackwood waved a dismissive hand as if swatting away a fly. "Father Santos has no authority under these new regulations." His tone was coldly efficient. There was no room for argument in his voice. Ayanna stood beside Jacob, her face pale but resolute. "Our union is sacred," she asserted quietly but firmly. "It honors both our peoples." "Sacred or not," Blackwood replied with icy detachment, "the law is clear." He gestured to Marshal Hayes, who stepped forward menacingly. "Ma'am," Hayes said bluntly, "you are under arrest for illegal residency." His hand rested on the revolver at his hip, as if anticipating resistance. Ayanna's breath hitched in her throat. Fear flashed across her features as she took a step closer to Jacob. "No, you can't do this!" Jacob shouted, as Hayes moved closer to Ayanna. "You have no right." "The law grants me every right," Blackwood replied matter-of-factly as he glanced down at his documents again. "And you are also charged with harboring a fugitive." Jacob's heart raced as anger surged through him like wildfire. He took a step forward to confront Blackwood directly. "You're tearing apart what little family I have left. You don't care about us, only your corporate greed." Blackwood remained unmoved. It was clear this wasn't personal for him. It was business as usual in pursuit of profits for those who backed him financially. "You will regret this decision," Jacob spat out through clenched teeth, while Hayes stepped closer to Ayanna again. readying himself for any resistance she might offer. As panic swept over them both, Ayanna grasped Jacob's arm tightly with trembling fingers, her strength faltering under mounting pressure from authority figures closing in around them. "Please, don't take me away," she whispered desperately. "Not without a fight." Jacob growled defiantly but felt helpless against such overwhelming odds stacked against them now, laws manipulated by men who sought only power and wealth at any cost. Judge Blackwood motioned for Hayes to cuff Ayanna with iron shackles that glinted ominously in the sunlight streaming through their window, their home now feeling like a cage instead of refuge or sanctuary, where love once flourished freely within its walls. As they restrained her wrists behind her back with metal cuffs biting into tender skin beneath cloth sleeves, lined with patches from years spent mending clothes alongside caring for him during days gone by, all those moments flooded back through memories-filled joy, now twisted cruelly into despair. Jacob lunged forward instinctively despite knowing there would be consequences. How could anyone allow this travesty? "You can't just take her," he yelled, while struggling against Hayes's iron grip, holding him back firmly yet calmly, as if anticipating just such an outburst, the marshal's demeanor almost condescending despite everything unfolding around them. With every ounce of courage left inside him, the territorial guards released Jacob from their grip once Judge Blackwood and the prison wagon carrying Ayanna disappeared down the mountain path. His trading license was suspended, but they allowed him to remain free while awaiting further legal proceedings. The moment they left, he saddled his horse and galloped toward the territorial jail, his heart pounding with desperate hope. At the jail, stone-faced guards blocked his path. "Judge's orders," one said flatly. "No visitors for the Apache woman." Jacob pleaded, argued, even offered bribes, but the guards remained unmoved. Through the thick walls, he thought he heard Ayanna's voice, though it might have been his imagination. The sound broke something inside him. He rode back to his cabin in a daze, pulled out the whiskey bottle he'd kept hidden since his marriage, and began drinking heavily. The empty rooms echoed with memories of Ayanna's presence. Her herbs hanging from the rafters, the neat stack of firewood she'd arranged, the half-finished moccasins she'd been sewing. Each reminder felt like a knife in his heart. "Not again!" he roared, hurling his cup against the wall. "I couldn't protect Sarah, and now I've failed Ayanna too!" His voice cracked with grief and rage. In her windowless cell, Ayanna curled around her empty womb, mourning their lost child. The stress of arrest had triggered bleeding and cramping that morning. She refused to cry out, drawing instead on her grandmother's teachings about enduring hardship. "We are like the desert plants," the old woman had said. "We bend, but do not break." Ayanna whispered these words to herself in the darkness. Father Miguel and Elena arrived 2 days later, their horses lathered from hard riding. Elena immediately went to the jail, while Miguel sought out Jacob. "This is an abomination before God and man," Miguel declared, finding Jacob slumped at his table. "These new territorial laws directly contradict federal treaties. We must fight this through proper channels." Elena returned with tears of frustration. "They won't let anyone see her," she reported, "not even to bring her food or clean clothes." Captain William Brooks watched these events unfold with growing unease. His military training demanded respect for civilian authority, but his conscience rebelled at this obvious injustice. He saw how Judge Blackwood's legal proceedings served only wealthy railroad interests, not true justice. Word spread through the mountain communities. Traders who had benefited from Ayanna's healing skills gathered at Jacob's cabin, offering support. "She saved my boy's life when fever took him," one gruff trapper declared. "Ain't right what they're doing." Others nodded in agreement. Neighbors who had initially viewed Jacob's marriage with suspicion now expressed outrage at Blackwood's heavy-handed tactics. "If they can do this to you," a nearby homesteader observed, "they can do it to any of us." As night fell, Jacob sat alone in his cabin, holding Ayana's medicine bundle, a small deerskin pouch the authorities had overlooked in their search. His fingers traced the careful stitching, remembering how she had explained each sacred herb and symbol. Miles away in her cell, Ayana lay on a narrow cot, her hand pressed against the cold stone wall. Though separated by distance and walls, both husband and wife held on to a fierce determination. This would not be the end of their story. "I will find a way," Jacob whispered to the empty room. "Whatever it takes, I will find a way to make this right." Elena knelt beside Jacob at his cabin table, carefully unwrapping Ayana's grandmother's medicine bundle. Her gentle fingers traced each item with reverence, explaining their significance to the grieving man. "These herbs, sage, cedar, sweetgrass, they're sacred to her people," Elena said softly. "Each one has both healing properties and spiritual meaning." She paused as her fingers encountered something unexpected, a stiff piece of paper, carefully wrapped in oiled deerskin and tucked deep within the bundle. "What's this?" She carefully unfolded the brittle document, her eyes widening as she read. "Jacob, look. It's a treaty, signed in 1868. It granted specific Apache families the right to live on their traditional lands forever." Jacob leaned forward, hope flickering in his tired eyes. Elena's fingers traced the detailed boundary descriptions, her excitement growing. "These landmarks, the three-peaked mountain, the medicine spring, the lightning-struck pine, they're all here in your valley. This land was guaranteed to Ayana's grandfather's family by federal law." "Uncle Miguel needs to see this immediately," Elena declared, already rolling the precious document carefully. "These are legal rights that even territorial courts must respect." Father Miguel arrived within the hour, studying the treaty with growing excitement. "This could change everything," he said, his weathered face animated. "I must ride for the territorial capital at once. The federal treaty archives there will have matching records that can verify this document's authenticity." As Miguel prepared to leave, Captain William Brooks arrived, his military bearing somehow both straight and weary. He had clearly been wrestling with his conscience. "I've made my decision," he announced. "I'll provide military escort for Father Miguel and officially support your cause. My career may suffer, but I can no longer enforce laws that violate both federal treaties and basic human decency." Elena wasted no time organizing community support. She visited every cabin and trading post within riding distance, gathering testimonials from people whose lives Ayana had touched. Gruff trappers spoke of wounds healed and fevers broken. Trading families described her gentle way with their children. Even several of Brooks's soldiers came forward, telling how they had witnessed her caring for injured men regardless of uniform or background. "She saved my daughter's life when no other medicine worked," Martha Jensen declared, the homesteader's wife's voice firm with conviction. "I don't care what that judge says about her being Apache. She's a healer and a good woman." Similar stories poured in. Men and women who had once viewed all Native people with suspicion now spoke up forcefully about Ayana's character and contributions to their remote community. Their written testimonials filled page after page with accounts of her healing work and gentle spirit. Judge Blackwood, however, remained unmoved. When presented with the growing stack of testimonials, he barely glanced at them before pushing them aside. "Community sentiment is irrelevant to territorial law," he declared coldly, his carefully groomed appearance matching his precise dismissal. "The railroad's development plans take precedence over local concerns." But Miguel's research in the territorial capital proved fruitful beyond their hopes. In the dusty archives, he discovered something devastating to Blackwood's position. The railroad company's own survey maps clearly showed Jacob's Valley fell within the treaty boundaries. "Look here," Miguel said triumphantly to the territorial clerk, spreading out the maps. "The railroad's own surveyors marked these boundaries exactly as described in the 1868 treaty. They knew this was protected land when they started pushing for these removals." The clerk, a thin man with ink-stained fingers, nodded slowly. This is exactly the kind of evidence that could force Judge Blackwood to acknowledge federal treaty rights supersede territorial regulations, he admitted, especially since the railroad's own documents confirm the boundaries. Miguel burst into the jail's front office, his weathered face flushed from hard riding. "I have proof," he declared, spreading documents across the desk. Not just the treaty validation, but evidence of Judge Blackwood's monthly payments from railroad interests. Captain Brooks stood beside him, ramrod straight in his cavalry uniform. "I've submitted my official report questioning the legality of overriding federal treaties," he announced, placing additional papers alongside Miguel's evidence. "These removals violate both military protocol and constitutional law." Outside, Elena led a growing crowd of witnesses, traders, settlers, and mountain men who had benefited from Ayana's healing skills. Their testimonies filled page after page, each one speaking to her character and value to the community. Sheriff Thompson scratched his head, studying the documents with growing concern. "This ain't right," he muttered. "Judge can't just ignore federal law because the railroad wants the land." Word reached the territorial governor's office, where mounting evidence of corruption and brewing scandal forced immediate action. His office dispatched orders to review the entire case, particularly after receiving a flood of petitions from neighboring settlements. Judge Blackwood's composure cracked. "Move up the transport," he barked at the guards. "Get her out tonight." He turned to Jacob, who stood watching with clenched fists. "Try to stop it, and you'll face additional charges." But the community had already mobilized. Traders announced they would boycott any business supporting the railroad's interests. Settlers gathered at the governor's mansion, demanding justice. Father Miguel organized a prayer vigil outside the jail that drew people from every faith and background in the territory. As sunset approached, the governor's representative arrived on a lathered horse, official papers in hand. "All prisoner transport is suspended pending full review," he declared, presenting the orders to the jail staff. Judge Blackwood's face turned ashen as he watched his carefully constructed scheme collapse. A telegram arrived from his railroad backers, making it clear they were severing all connections to avoid the growing scandal. Through her cell window, Ayana heard the cheers of the gathered crowd. For the first time since her arrest, hope flickered in her dark eyes. The community that had become her home was standing together, fighting for justice with a strength that transcended boundaries of race and culture. The territorial governor's investigation revealed layers of corruption that shocked the territory. Documents proved Judge Blackwood had accepted monthly payments from railroad interests, while corporate telegrams exposed systematic pressure on territorial officials to ignore federal treaty rights. Facing mounting pressure and the threat of federal intervention, the governor took decisive action. He not only reinstated Jacob and Ayana's marriage, but offered Jacob a new role as official liaison between the territorial government and peacefully settled native families. When the jail doors opened, Ayana ran straight into Jacob's waiting arms. Tears streamed down both their faces as they held each other, surrounded by the community that had fought for their justice. Elena watched with bright eyes, proud that her discovery of the treaty document had helped expose the truth. Captain Brooks received an unexpected commendation for upholding federal law, his career stronger for choosing principle over blind obedience. Judge Blackwood was led away in handcuffs to face federal charges, while the railroad company publicly withdrew its aggressive land claims. Under golden autumn light, Father Miguel performed their marriage renewal. This time the ceremony included not just Elena as maid of honor, but dozens of community members who had stood by them. Standing together on their cabin porch afterward, Jacob and Ayana looked out over the valley that was now legally their home forever, their love having sparked change far beyond their own lives. Spring painted the Colorado Valley in vibrant colors, transforming more than just the landscape. 6 months had passed since justice prevailed, and Jacob and Ayana's homestead bustled with new life and purpose. Their trading post had evolved into something greater, a place where Apache families could settle legally while keeping their sacred traditions alive. Ayana moved through their expanded cabin with quiet grace, her growing belly a testament to new beginnings. Unlike their first loss, this pregnancy carried hope instead of desperation. Inside the cabin, she sorted healing herbs while teaching younger Apache women their traditional uses. Outside, Jacob negotiated fair trades between settlers and native families, his quiet strength helping bridge old divides. Father Miguel's simple chapel stood nearby, its doors open to all faiths. The sound of prayers in English, Spanish, and Apache drifted on the mountain breeze. Elena, now a respected teacher, gathered children of all backgrounds under the newly built schoolhouse's roof. Captain Brooks, having traded his military uniform for civilian clothes, made regular visits to ensure peace prevailed. His presence reminded everyone how justice had triumphed over greed. As sunset painted the sky in amber hues, Jacob and Ayana sat together on their wide porch. They watched native and white children playing together, while her skilled hands taught him to weave a traditional cradle board. Thanks for spending a moment here with me. If this story touched you, let's keep this connection going. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.